Hello everyone, my name is Matthew Phillips and this is my Intercultural Communication Critical Assignment video presentation. For this assignment I chose to examine the intercultural communication practices of South Korea, and the approach that I took was the approach of increased intercultural literacy. Now, increasing intercultural literacy has been a goal of South Korea for some time, but recent practices implemented largely from the South Korean government have handcuffed particularly the youth within South Korea and presented them with two overbearing paradoxes in their pursuit for increased intercultural literacy. Now, before we get too far into increasing intercultural literacy and what's going on in South Korea, it's important to understand a little bit of background and a little bit of history regarding South Korea. In 1950, during the aftermath of World War II, the United States and Soviet Union essentially agreed to separate North and South Korea along what is now known as the DMZ, or the Demilitarized Zone. Not too long after the 1950 separation, North Korea invaded South Korea with the goal of spreading communist rule throughout all of Korea, aided by the Soviet Union. In 1953, an armistice was signed in which essentially a ceasefire was agreed to between North and South Korea. However, the two countries technically still remain at war today, more than 60 years after the armistice was signed. The reason from an intercultural communication standpoint why this is important is because while South Korea looks to increase their intercultural literacy, they have to deal with the struggles of the threat of attack from North Korea on a daily basis. North Korea has been in the news recently for testing certain nuclear devices, and they also frequently engage in cyber attacks on South Korea. So while South Korea looks to increase their intercultural literacy, they have problems with members who had previously been of their own culture prior to the separation in 1953. There are certain families that have members spread across either North or South Korea, and there are youth within South Korea who will never get to meet their grandparents. So moving more to the crux of my paper and this idea of exploring two paradoxes as roadblocks for increased intercultural literacy. The first paradox in the pursuit of increased intercultural literacy within South Korea is that of education. Since 1990, South Korea had actively sought to send students international to receive a higher education, particularly amongst graduate students in the United States. However, recently there's been a downturn in students going overseas to pursue an education, primarily because when they come home, they're not finding jobs. While there is value in going overseas and having intercultural experiences, this value is now being overshadowed by people who stay home within South Korea and build connections with businesses and firms there. Now, the problem with this, and the reason why a paradox exists, is because the South Korean government has acknowledged the need for increased intercultural literacy. A majority of their economic policies actually promote increased intercultural literacy and, in some extent, even require such. However, even though the government has long been promoting students going overseas and receiving education, now it's gotten to the point where some students, even when they're eligible for graduation, are choosing to prolong their graduation and stay in school sometimes 5 or 6 years at a time because there aren't any jobs available for them when they come home because they haven't cultivated the relationships within South Korea as some of their peers. This then discourages discourages students in particular from attaining increased intercultural literacy and actually encourages them to stay home and just cultivate relationships there. This is a problem that should be addressed, and it should be addressed specifically from the South Korean government and through possibly some sort of economic incentive for companies who either take a long look at students who studied overseas or do something to make it less burdensome for students who did gain their degree overseas to then come back home and find a job. The second paradox that exists within South Korean culture relates to that of technology. The South Korean government has invested countless resources in developing the world's fastest and most advanced internet system. Users in South Korea can stream video online in a subway, and the overall internet capabilities of the country is unparalleled internationally. However, while South Korea uses internet as a means to promote innovation and things of that nature, what's actually happening is the youth are becoming addicted to internet. Rehabilitation camps have been opened for youth who are addicted to internet, and there are stories of children as young as 15 years old who go into these camps, are forced to turn over their cell phones, and they say things like, "I felt like my entire world is dark, and I feel so much despair and depression that I don't know how I'm going to be able to continue to live without my technological devices." Now, the paradox exists in the fact that the South Korean government, while implementing new laws such as the Cinderella Law, are attempting to dissuade youth from engaging in excessive internet use. They're also at the same time promoting internet use and internet capabilities among their youth because they are instituting programs where youth can actually join cyber warfare divisions within their military, and that will fulfill the needs for them to serve in the military. Now, the problem with this is that the negative ramifications from too much technology use have become so severe that certain researchers have found South Korean youth are unable to engage in what they term analog relationships, or what we would consider to just be in person, person to person contact. If the youth are unable to cultivate interpersonal relationships or analog relationships, then they're not going to be able to increase their intercultural literacy. Dependence on technology, while there are certainly benefits from an intercultural standpoint in communicating via technology, ultimately a culture can only be experienced and then developed and benefited from if there are significant interpersonal skills that accompany that. So, in all, the current state of South Korea intercultural literacy is at kind of a standstill. For a while, the country promoted, like I said, students going overseas, and they had programs that kind of helped aid in the promotion of intercultural literacy. But now that's sort of flatlined, and in some sense, it's actually taken a step backwards. So that's my synopsis of my paper. It's been a tremendous 8 weeks with you all this session. For those of you that are still going to be around next session, I look forward to continue discussion via discussion boards and assignments like these, and I greatly appreciate all the discussions that we've had thus far. Thank you all, good luck, take care.